my goodness, it's getting hot up in here in the United States with this election season, 2024. Whew, lots going on, lots stirred up, and we might wonder how we can move through this with graceful composure. And so today's guest is Jose Stevens, my teacher, mentor from the Power Path, wonderful teacher of shamanism. He's got a new book out, The Shaman's Book of Extraordinary Practices. And we're going to hear which of those practices would be the most helpful during this time to help us stay in that knowing of who we are in truth and love as we meet all that comes into our path. Join us to find out more.
Soul Nectar Show, the Soul Nectar Show. You're invited, delighted to discover who you are. Anything is possible if you believe. So join us on this beautiful journey. Soul Nectar Show. Soul Nectar Show.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Soul Nectar Show, that show where we talk about all things essence, where we gather around the campfire and we share our connection to that which is greater than us, to the big mystery beyond the veil, to those synchronistic moments that lead us inexorably to a deeper understanding of who we are and why we are here on this planet. I am your host, Carrie Hummingbird, and I love coming on this show week after week and bringing you my friends and my teachers to learn from and to have these powerful conversations that just 1 hour can be totally transformational. So hope you set aside the time to be with us this entire time, because we're going to go some really interesting, wonderful places that are going to help you through this election season. And you have my teacher, Jose Stevens, with us. Welcome, Jose.
Oh, welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so Jose is, I've been my teacher, I don't know, like 9 years or something. I lost track of time, but a long time, however long it's been, probably lifetimes, let's just say that. And he's a beautiful example of walking the beauty way. As you guys know, I love Indigenous teachings, and I find such truth and resonance from learning from Indigenous elders, and Jose as well. So Jose is a PhD. He's an internationally renowned author, lecturer, and teacher. He completed a 10-year apprenticeship with Wishatika Maracame, which is a shaman, in the Sierras of central Mexico. And in addition, he's studying intensively with the Shipipos in the jungle in the Peruvian Amazon and with the Pacos in the Andes in Peru. And he completed his doctoral dissertation at the California Institute of Integral Studies, focusing on the interface between shamanism and Western psychological counseling. And so Jose's just got great insights into being a Western person, embracing shamanism, Indigenous teachings, and charting a different kind of course. He's the author of more than 20 books and numerous articles. And his latest book, The Shaman's Book of Extraordinary Practices, 58 Power Tools for Personal Transformation. And I've learned a lot of these through studying with Jose. So we're going to explore some interesting territory today. I know it's going to open up great dialogue. And the question really is, for I think most of us are asking right now, is what practices, what can we bring into our lives to help us move through this election season, which is extremely divisive and polarized and, tearing our United States apart and the world, really, because a lot of people around the world are kind of afraid about what's going to happen. And, there's going to be an aftermath. But I think that those of us who are tuning into this conversation would like to know, how can we move through this with graceful composure, without losing ourselves to the drama, but also not just sitting back and doing nothing, but also being proactive and being helpful. I mean, that's a tall order. So, what are some of the practices that you share in the book that you think would be helpful? I know that I had mentioned to you, I realize the importance of returning to neutral, and I sure do try to do that. But I'm not always successful in the moment. And, it's because of my fear, right? And so the practice of dissolving fear and remembering that everything is divine. So these are some of the things, but what do you feel in your heart is the best to share with people at this time?
Oh, well, there's a number of things. Shamanism has always been very practical. So it's sometimes people, they don't really understand. They don't know very much about shamanism. And they think of it as something weird that Indigenous people do over there in the mountains or, but it's the world's oldest spiritual practice. And it's not its own religion. It's not a religion, it's a spiritual way. So I've met shamans throughout the world some of them were Catholic, some of them were Islamic, some of them were Hindus, the Tibetan Buddhists, but they were all practitioners of shamanism. So shamanism sort of like is pan religion. It crosses many cultures and it's to be found in all parts of the world. Historically, it's been everywhere. And it's practiced very similarly in different parts of the world, even though thousands of years ago, people didn't have any way of communicating with each other. They still practice the same way. So it's nature-based. It's based on the basic rules of nature, which are the same anywhere you go on this planet. So you could say that shamanism is like very endemic to the earth itself. And being pragmatic, it's always been about helping people survive on this planet. So I like to focus on the fact that if it weren't for shamans, probably the human race would never have survived the way it has. And now we take it for granted, but there was a time when we had to compete with a lot of other animals to survive. And it wasn't just our intelligence or wily ways that helped us survive. It was actually that certain human beings amongst us at that time, long, long ago, thousands of years ago, developed certain abilities that they discovered in themselves: the ability to talk to plants, the ability to talk to animals, the ability to tune into the weather and know what the weather was going to do ahead of time. So prophecy, prediction, to use things as oracles. Oracles can be anything. It can be like tea leaves, cup of tea. You can read them and you can access information and wisdom from anything, especially things in nature. So shamans were the first doctors, medical doctors. They knew how to set bones. They knew how to reduce fevers through various plants that they discovered could do those, help people to heal. So they were surprisingly effective at these things. They were also the first psychotherapists, the first psychologists. They knew how to treat people who were traumatized, who were maybe a little bit off mentally, psychotic, things like that. They could actually work with these people and help them in some ways better than we do today. Because now we just medicate people with pharmaceuticals, but there they had to work with the person's family and all kinds of things that turned out to be actually very effective. So it's survival oriented and it's very practical. And so it makes sense that today in our world, which is very complicated, as we all know, with technologies and with international relations and all these things that can sometimes be problematic and create a lot of stress in us, that it's interesting that the shamanic knowledge base can address these things too. It doesn't matter, modern day, old times, whenever. And one of these things you mentioned was this business about becoming neutral in the face of things that trigger us. Because anything can trigger a person, like watching somebody mistreat an animal. That certainly can trigger me. I right away get indignant and got to do something about this. And other people get triggered by news articles or the news feed that they read on their phones or whatever. And elections can be very triggering. Politics can be very triggering, and on and on. Okay. So what do we do in a world where we're constantly being triggered to feel angry, to feel upset, to feel fearful? And of course, these things tend to spin out of control. And, we start out being a little fearful, and then we're more fearful and more and more and more. And pretty soon we're paranoid. And, these things are not good for us and they're not good for our relations. So we have to have ways of coming back from these highly stressful blind alleys, because usually they don't lead to solutions. They just lead to more panic or more of the same, but they don't provide solutions. So shamanism emphasizes neutrality. And people have trouble with that word. They think neutral, that sounds boring. It's like life is about drama. Life is about, it can be very exciting. It's like, why should we seek neutrality? We can have all this drama. Well, everything in its place, the drama has its place. And sometimes we go on a roller coaster just for a little drama. And that's fine. But do we really want drama every second of the day? Not really. It's not helpful. So we need to have ways to come back to a more neutral place, even though the world continues to go on being stressful. And so one of the notions of shamanism that is related to neutrality is what they call, indigenous people call seeing everything as medicine. They say, look, everything that you can possibly imagine is medicine. The sun is medicine. The wind is medicine. The trees are medicine. Plants are medicine. Other people can be medicine for us. We're medicine for other people. So if you start to look at this business of everything is medicine, we know that certain medicines that, people think of in terms of pharmaceuticals or even other things like the sun, a little bit of sun is really good for us. Vitamin D strengthens our immune system. Good to be in the sun often. But too much sun burns our skin. It turns toxic. It's no longer just a medicine, but it's actually a poison. So the best medicines are also poisons. So we have to understand that about medicine. And so if we look at the world as medicine, then all politicians can be medicine. And how are they medicine? Well, this particular politician shows us how not to be. That's medicine. This other politician shows us maybe how to be that in ways that we feel good about, that work in terms of like relationships with other people and treating people a certain way. And so we also know that those very same people we could regard as toxic, depending on our point of view. They can either be a medicine or they can be toxic. If we see them as toxic, which is our typical way, we see the toxic first, then we tend to go into judgment. We tend to go into rejection. We tend to go into anger, fear, and things that don't end up in a good place. So we don't, that doesn't heal us. So medicines are supposed to heal us. So in order to do that, in order to heal, we have to see everything as medicine rather than as a poison. And then, only then can we start to be healed by the presentation of that in our lives. Like, no, we don't want to expose ourselves to the sun all day long. We don't want to expose ourselves to this particular person all day long, but a little bit will teach us what we need to learn. That can be a healing. That can be medicine. So shamans would go so far as to say that even cancer or any disease, things that we consider to be a disease, we consider those things in our today's world as being the enemy. And so we have war against cancer and things like that, as if it was an opponent that you have to battle and win. But the shamanic way is to look at how can cancer be a medicine? What is it trying to teach us? What is it trying to show us about ourselves? Maybe we haven't been living right. Maybe our diet's been all wrong. Maybe we're angry too much of the time. Maybe this is a message. Maybe this is a way of learning about ourselves. That doesn't mean that we just ignore the cancer. Sure, we have to treat it, but at the same time, it's much more treatable when we get the lesson, because then we don't need it anymore. Once you get the medicine, you may not need to take a second dose because you learn the lesson. So this is a huge topic.
Yeah, it's huge. When you were talking, it was starting to sink in that my approach for this has been a little off. It's like I've been asking a question of why do these different groups of people see it completely differently? Because from my perspective, what I see the other side think seems delusional. But then from their perspective, they think we're going to wake. I've seen both sides say, you're going to wake up really soon and you're going to find out. And you don't know what you're talking about. Like both groups are saying that about the other sides. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I was thinking like, how do you discern the truth? But actually what you're saying is a different conversation. You're actually pointing at a whole different conversation, which is how is what I'm witnessing medicine for me? Like what I'm witnessing in this conversation about how do you discern the truth? Looks like a lot of people are having trouble discerning the truth or disagreeing about it. That's my inquiry right? That's my lens I'm looking at things through. So that's actually my conversation for myself, not necessarily what everybody else is thinking or talking about. Like everyone's probably got their own medicine with this.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with trying to determine what the truth is. We're that's a part of our growth and development, is being discerning and being able to distinguish between a lie and the truth. But you're right, this is a different conversation. That's okay if you do that, as long as it doesn't end up in intense rejection or judgment or anger. If it just ends up in more knowledgeable, oh, I can discern here which side is telling the truth. That's helpful. But we're talking about a whole different conversation here, which is that we're putting away that set of glasses, putting on a different set of glasses that may show us like a whole different set of information. How is this medicine? How can it be used as medicine? Or how can it be a poison? And both are very valuable to discern. Like, oh, I've been seeing this way. And because I've been seeing it this way, it's showing up as a poison. I could see it this way over here, and it's showing up as a medicine. What's better for me? Medicine. Okay. So that's a different frame. And in some cases, looking at the world from a different frame is much better for us.
Because then it gets us out of that, I'm right, you're wrong. No, I'm right, you're wrong. Kind of endless loop of
that's going nowhere.
Debate that goes nowhere. And then everyone's projecting. And then you add religion in it, because in this election of religion is completely entwined into it. And now you've got like people's deepest passions like provoked by this contest over who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
And all tied in with this prediction of the end of the world and all this kind of other stuff. And so that's based in fear, right? I mean, a lot of this is the fear. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the fears that actually are provoked and how we can dissolve some of those? Because when we're in fear, we're obviously going to be hooked into these other ways of seeing that are less productive than what you're suggesting, which is looking at things through medicine as medicine.
Well, this is an enormous topic.
Touch on just touching. Yeah.
And a really good topic. It's like fundamental. It's at the core of everything. So I'm going to try to condense here to make it like understandable, but also simple and yet comprehensive all at the same time. So fear is, as we know, it's a kind of reaction inside of us that causes fight or flight reactions in us. And originally it was designed to save ourselves from tigers and various predators who were trying to get us. And as long as it's in that frame of reference, it's a useful device, but it's spiraled out of control. And now we're afraid of our own shadows and afraid of what might be or could be or, abstract stuff. And it spoils our joy at being alive. In some cases, it turns our life into a living hell, actually. People that are afraid of everything all the time. It's not a really great way to live. So we really have to unpack fear. So the first step is to find out what fundamentally, what is everybody afraid of? What is the most fundamental fear that everybody has at some level? And so you can, kick that around a while, but what you're going to end up with is that it's the fear of annihilation. It's that somehow something's going to come along and annihilate us. And by annihilation, the real fear is that, like, if something comes and kills me, I'm going to be forgotten. I won't even know that I was alive. I'll be nothing left of me. And you might ask, well, if you're just nothing, then how do you don't miss anything anyway, so why is that a problem? But people just freak out about annihilation. And of course, that breaks down into all the ways you can be annihilated. Like you can be annihilated by somebody killing your body, but you can be annihilated by somebody ruining your reputation. There's a lot of different levels of annihilation, but they're all equally like horrifying. Okay. So the fear of annihilation breaks into two other fears that you find almost everybody has. And one of them is the fear of abandonment. So if I'm abandoned by my tribe and they exile me, they kick me out of the village, and I'm up, let's say, in Inuit territory up in Alaska, well, I'm not going to live very long. So annihilation. So abandonment to most people feels like annihilation and we know that babies don't thrive if they're ignored and nobody touches them and they don't live very long. They've done experiments with monkeys and that's the case. They just die because they have no touching, they're, abandoned. So the other fear is entrapment. Like nobody wants to be trapped. Nobody wants to be put in jail. Nobody wants to be made a slave, have their freedom taken away. There's many, many ways that entrapment looks like being in a terrible marriage, which you can't seem to get yourself out of, or ending up with way too many kids that you have to raise and take care of, and you're broke all the time. It's like another form of entrapment. I'm trapped by the circumstances, or being in a bad job, or it comes down to the same thing. I'm going to be thrown in a dungeon under the castle. They're not going to feed me, and I'm going to die. So it's annihilation again, but through a different avenue, entrapments. So most people that you meet are one or the other. And when they meet each other, there's a kind of weird attraction. Like the person who's afraid of abandonment seems to always find a person who's afraid of being trapped. And then the dance starts, right? It's like one's running after the other, clinging and codependent, and the other one's screaming, trying to get away. And the dance goes on and on and on, and it produces a lot of misery. So those two fears break into 7 fears, which we're all very familiar with. They're greed, self-destructiveness, self-deprecation, arrogance, martyrdom, impatience, and stubbornness. Everybody knows those words, and everybody knows kind of what they look like. But they're actually fear patterns. Every one of those represents a fear. For example, impatience, the fear is I'm going to run out of time and I'm never going to get it all done. Or stubbornness, like the fear of like somebody's going to try to force me to do what I don't want to do. And I've got to put a stop to that. I've got to refuse. And self-deprecation is the fear of not having any self-worth. So we could go through every one of them and see what the fear is. But fundamentally, every one of those fears goes back to the fear of annihilation. Somehow, if I'm judged, if I run out of time, if I'm forced to do what I don't want to do, it's going to kill me. And there we're back to annihilation again, right?
Yeah. So, and you described all those fear patterns in the seven dragons, but I'll put the link in the show notes for you guys too, so you can check out Transforming Your Dragons.
Yeah, it goes into great detail on these, and it's very enlightening, very revealing of these patterns. Everybody's got them. So, you can find them in yourself, but you can find them in your neighbors and your family. And I like to call them obstacles because they really are obstacles to happiness and joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. They really are obstacles. So fear is our greatest obstacle. And those that are more spiritually inclined know that the original annihilation has to do with feeling abandoned by spirit or being separated from spirit somehow so that we have no relationship with spirit anymore. And everybody fundamentally knows that at some level, and it could be pretty deep down, that if they don't have a relationship with spirit, they're going to die. And it does seem to be true, but that's a bigger story and we don't have time to get into all that. So I'm just going to leave that where it is. But that's where shamanism and this topic of fear really come together, because the shamanic perspective is that all disease, all ills that people suffer from, whether they're mental illness or physical illnesses or even accidents, things that happen to us, traumas, can all be traced back to disconnection from spirit. Because the shamanic perspective is that everything is spirit. Everything is spirit, is a manifestation of spirit. And if we lose the connection and we start looking at the world around us as sort of not me, something else, then we're pretty disconnected in every way. And then usually the result of that is that you destroy your planet, which we've done a good job with. So that doesn't work. That heads us for annihilation. you can see it's a spider web. It's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You're doing such a great job at like pulling all these pieces together, because the indigenous path is about reconnecting us
reconnecting.
to the truth that we never left the garden, that we've always been in the garden, and that we didn't leave. Like, we're here, we have food. And you talk to indigenous people, they say Mother Earth is always here for us, ground under our feet, food always available, water available, everything's always available. But
Right.
when we live in the Western lifestyle, we live in a house that's in a high rise or separate from the earth. We go off into our minds instead of paying attention to our bodies, right? So there's this huge disconnect. We think God is someplace out there that we don't know, somewhere over there, out there. And then we get really lost because we feel like we've been just abandoned on this rock. And there's this sense of like, how do I go back to heaven? How do I get out of this hell? And then your whole life is about seeing everything around you as hell, I would imagine, instead of seeing it as the beauty that it actually is.
And that's perspective. So shamanism is really big on shifting your point of view, that you always have a choice to shift the way you're seeing things. So if you see everything as disconnected, it will be for you and your experience. It'll follow. That'll continue to be sort of your experience in life, is that everything's disconnected. So your business deals are disconnected and your family gets disconnected, and, it's kind of a nightmare. You have a choice to see things differently, like it's all connected because it's all spirit. And granted, that's a tall order for us sometimes when we look around and it feels really discouraging and it just seems like overwhelming. How could spirit possibly be all around me? I mean, it doesn't feel that way. So it can be a struggle for us sometimes to shift our point of view, but we always have the freedom to shift how we're seeing things. Now, what most people don't understand is that when you make a choice to see things differently and you start looking around and say, I'm going to see spirit in everything, that in a curious sort of way, because spirit never went away in the first place, but spirit kind of like wakes up in the environment, maybe almost as if it went to sleep for a while, and we're waking it up and we're saying, hey, you're a spirit too. And you too, you're a spirit. Now, what if we did that with people, everybody we met? And, in the Himalayas, people who are traveling over the mountains and they greet each other on the trail, they say namaste, which is, the spirit in me recognizes the spirit in you. And in Guatemala and places like that where the Mayans are, they have a similar term that greets people on the trail and says something very similar, like, oh, you're another me. And so their culture it's, by the way, it's the term is Inglakesh in Mayan, and that's that, you're another me. So if you see another person as that they're another you and you're another them, that you're actually one being in separate bodies, apparently, that process, even if the other person is like daydreaming or off in another world, thinking of other things, that the fact that they are spirit too wakes them up because it's being seen and recognized, and it wakes up. And suddenly they're like, oh, something's happening to me. I'm feeling more alive. What is this? It's a subtle thing that begins to happen, and it eventually turns into, oh, I forgot, spirit's in me. Now, that happens over time. So it doesn't necessarily happen with a snap of the fingers. For some people it does, but this is a slower process. But nevertheless, that's kind of like the answer to everything. In my book, it is. It's kind of like, well, what else is there to do? So in the shamanic understanding of the world, a human being's purpose ultimately is to be a healer. And the way you heal people is not just to put a Band-Aid around the cut on their finger. It's to help them remember who they are, that they're actually a manifestation of spirit. If they can get that, then who cares about the little cut on their finger?
Yeah. And it also reduces the drama, but it requires us to look at the other person and say, you are also spirit, even when whatever they're currently doing or saying feels in complete antithesis to how you feel about life, right?
Mhm.
Like when we have these polar opposite experiences, it's like, wow, okay, you are also spirit. That's where the shadow work comes in of like, okay, why do I dislike you so much? Why do I want to withhold from you the truth that you are also spirit? Is because there's
Mhm.
something about what this person or this idea is reflecting that's like disturbing. And then that's part of who I am too, right? And so that's the shamanic practice, is to then look inside and say, oh, well, how is that part of me? How have I, let's say I experienced what I felt was a little bit of bullying in my last video about the election thing. And it's like, well, how am I also bullying? How could I be perceived as being a bully and pushing my way also? So it's like owning that piece and looking at it honestly within myself, not to judge myself, but just to go, oh, okay, that's also me. What I'm seeing in this other person, I'm also doing in some way.
Well, you're talking about the mirror effect or the echo effect.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use different metaphors, but the indigenous peoples and the shamanic cultures, they say basically that this reality that we experience is really just an echo chamber. It's showing us ourselves at all times. So you're saying exactly that if you see somebody being a bully, then how is that actually like a mirror image of the bullying that goes on? Maybe I bully myself. Maybe I'm not a bully to other people, but there's a little bully in here beating me up. So that's where conversation goes back to the beginning. That's medicine. If we can see that, oh, I've got a bully in here and it's beating me up all the time, and I'm seeing it out there, but that's showing me what I need to learn, then that becomes medicine, a very valuable medicine.
But does it stop there? I mean, because part of what I feel is confusing for me as a spiritual path walker is that I have these realizations and I go, okay, well, that's probably just my stuff. So I just need to go off and sequester and just deal with my own stuff and then I'm not taking any action in the outer world because I'm constantly just reflecting back to myself. Like, okay, that's just a reflection of me. So let me go back and heal myself. But then there's no, like, I'm never going to express my perspective or have a conversation with a different point of view. Like, where does that fit in to take what I like to call an inspired action? But how do you know it's inspired and it's not just your ego wanting to like change somebody? Because in this election, there's a lot of desire to change people, right? There's
Sure.
a lot of desire to change the outer world to make it more safe for the inner experience, right? So what do you recommend there?
That's a really good topic. It raises very important questions that we as human beings tend to get stuck on a lot. Now, if you look carefully, you'll almost always find that human beings get stuck or have trouble because they polarize, they swing from one pole to the other too extremely, instead of finding that place in the middle, which is often called neutral. Okay. So, like in that point of view, it's like, well, I can handle everything right here myself. I'll just look within and the whole world will magically become exactly the way I want it to. Well, that's unrealistic. It's too exaggerated. It's like we got to do both. We got to work on ourselves here and do what we can to support more justice or fairness or equality or equal opportunity, whatever you want to call that. There's many faces of it. We have to do what we can, even if that's just voting, which is a big deal. It's only one act. There's more things that we can do than just voting, but there is always action to be taken. I'm reminded of lately I've been studying because I truly believe that Jesus was a great shaman. He was clearly a trained shaman, and that I know the Bible doesn't really go into that, but there's these 30 years that are sort of ignored, right?
30 years of initiation.
Of
Yeah.
initiation, right? So the guy was a great shaman, and he spoke Aramaic, and Aramaic was the language of the nomads, and it was very different language, very very different language from, for example, English, Latin, Greek. The early writings of the apostles were in Aramaic. And then they got translated, not just once, but many times. It's like the game of telephone. Every time you translate something, it loses.
The message gets distorted by someone's perceptions, filters, and beliefs.
So we end up with all this stuff that we think that Jesus said. But if you look, at scholarship around the Aramaic language, and you go back to the original, boy, was he saying different stuff. He was saying totally shamanic. So, the interpretations are, like I and my Father are one and things like that. But actually, like, that's not a good translation. There's a word that got left out there that's part of Aramaic, which is I and my Father together are one. Little differences like that change the meaning of huge teachings. So one of the things that he was fond of talking about was that the universe itself, creation, has this very important quality that you can summarize in the words, I can. Obama's phrase, I can, that was brilliant. He was plucking that right out of Jesus' mouth. The I canness of the universe. The universe is always saying, I can. Oh, you want that? I can. If you want to see this, we can do that too, and so on. So creation has an I canness about it. And I can, nothing is impossible. Nothing is out of range. Nothing is like inconceivable. Everything is possible because I can. It's a part of creation. It's an interesting observation, an interesting way of looking at all that is, or spirit, or the Tao, or people call it all kinds of things, but it's basically a reference to what people call God. There's an I canness about it. And so whenever I run into something that I just can't figure out, and I can't conceive of, like, how are we ever going to get out of this problem on an international level or on a country level, I just start thinking about that it's all underneath that. There's a context of I can. And so it's like, oh, thank God, I don't have to solve this myself. There's an I canness solving it already.
Yeah. And it's that listening. It's that knowing that I can and listening for the answer, opening to receive it inside, creating the spaciousness for that to be possible. I think that's where a lot of times manifestation, people are always working on manifestation, manifest this, manifest that. What I've come to realize in myself is one of the main things is just believing it's possible, creating the seed of possibility that it could happen, because I can do that, because I can, as the I am that I am, I can do that. And as I speak it, my word, it is in the process, even if I'm not seeing evidence of it. And I think that's also where this, like what you're talking about, is like, can we retrain our eyes to see evidence that it is happening, instead of seeing evidence that it isn't?
Yes. So retraining, actually. It's going back to the original, because the earliest human beings had that perspective of the world, and we've lost it along the way and have to regain it again. And you just said something a few minutes ago, really, really important, which is a Jesus teaching, and he got it from his teachers. So it goes way back, which is, it's not about manifesting everything. There's so many books about that manifestation and how to create your own reality and create this. And he de-emphasized that. He said, don't worry about manifesting. He said, just receive, just be receptive to what he was referring to as the creator. Just receive what the creator is giving you, and that'll solve everything. No effort, no struggle, just be receptive. And you will find yourself in the place of being an excellent manifester without putting any effort into it. You'll just manifest what you need at all times.
Okay, well, Jose, I'm going to see you in the jungle like very, very soon, and we're going to work on this. You're going to help me with this.
Yeah. We'll actually have some classes on it.
Yay, awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. We're going to go study with the Shipipo. We're going to have some beautiful times. And so I always love my time with Power Path and with Jose and Lena and Anna. Thank you so much for this broadcast. I know that I just feel like this was so helpful. There are several pivotal keys you gave us to shift things in such a way that it would take us out of the drama, and put us in a more neutral space where I'm speaking for myself, but I feel like everyone listening has got at least one thing, if not 2, 3, 4, and 5, that would help us to just get through this with more grace and composure, which is what I asked you. So I appreciate you doing that. Is there anything else? I mean, I'm going to put the link to the book, you guys, the Shaman's book of extraordinary practices. Is there anything else that you want to offer people on the way out? Ways of interacting with you, or just a message that's coming through for you? Anything like that?
Well, depending on time, I was going to talk a little bit about silence as a practice.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll just say just a couple of words here that silence is a great practice, shamanic practice. It starts with making the environment quiet. So you turn your radios and televisions and things off and get it silent. But then there's still your head, that's like chattering away and making lots of noise. So that's the next level of business. It's like, okay, learning to quiet the mind. And you're never going to succeed at quieting the mind unless you switch your focus. And so, like we were talking about, right? So in this case, it's switching the focus over to, am I alive right now? I think so. I am alive. I can tell I'm alive. It's crazy to ask that question, but it's also really profound. It focuses you on something there's no words for. And so you contemplate aliveness, consciousness. I'm conscious. I'm here. And there's no words for that. So you can't come up with words for it. So for a moment, you're in complete silence in your aliveness. That's the key to meditation right there. If you can get there, you've got meditation. You just have to stay there. That's another trick, though, staying there.
It is. And, I just want to reflect, like, over the time that I've studied with you and the Power Path, I have been a recipient of this silence in classes that we had together, where all of a sudden there was this profound silence, just the total presence, but everything was silent. That is such a gift. That is such a profound gift to experience that presence and the relief from the constant churn and chatter that typically happens in our society and inside our minds. In that space, what I found was so interesting is how coming out of a moment like that, there'll be like you're about to share something, guided to share something, and we'll all already kind of know kind of the quality of what you're about to say. And there'll be this like giggle through the whole space.
Uh-huh.
Because we already know that you're about to say something that we are all already know you're going to say. And that is such a gift. It's really powerful to be in that experience. And it's priceless, that gift. Talk about money, whatever. Money's nothing. That is really powerful.
Well, that points to another word here that's really important, which is alignment. Alignment with spirit. So when you get to that place that's really quiet and you're in your aliveness, and yet there's no words, that automatically puts you in alignment with spirit. And that is the beginning of a huge experience. But if you're thinking, well, I'm out of alignment with spirit, that's the way to do it.
And it opens up all the other things you talk about in here, actually. I mean, these practices you have are to help open up that experience of silence. But it's the compatible experience when I've been aligned with spirit. What I've experienced is this tremendous peace and gratitude in my heart wide open, just grateful to be alive and really in awe of being aware in that moment of my allness and our collective, whatever you want to call it, consciousness, our beingness. Wow. Those moments are so the most valuable to me, I would say.
Yeah, that's the famous gratitude, love, and awe teaching.
Yeah, because during my regular day, when my mind is busy or whatever, sometimes it's harder for me, and I think others can relate as I say this, to access that gratitude, love, and awe. And so these practices of, I'm alive, right? So getting to that place of I am alive, and so is everything else. You have one of the first practices, acknowledging things, saying good morning to everything, and
Right.
waking up. It's simple, but it's profound. That creates that sense of the truth, which is interconnectedness with all that is. And then just grateful that you remember that, because we forgot usually. Getting back into knowing of that is really helpful.
Well, just one more word about this business of being alive. It's really basic, really, really simple, but it's the one common thing among all human beings on the planet at any given time, any moment. All human beings that are alive are aware that they're alive. Okay. So if you asked anybody on this planet, are you alive right now? Every one of them would say yes. I mean, some might have a few doubts, like, I think so.
I might be a zombie.
But basically, they're going to nod their heads going, yeah, I'm alive right now. So that's universal. That's the thing that ties us all together, is that we're all sharing this one thing called aliveness. And it's not unique to us. It's not like you're alive and I'm alive, but those are two different things. Your aliveness is my aliveness. We're both alive. There's only one thing.
It's kind of genius.
It takes a little, contemplation.
But that is kind of a genius way of bringing it. Yeah. The little back door that says you really can't deny that everyone's alive who's alive right now.
Right. Goes beyond politics, goes beyond all religions.
Now, you might not wish some people were alive, but they are. So that's another conversation.
That's another conversation. Yeah.
That's the shift of perspective conversation. That's awesome, Jose. As usual. Man, I just love our conversations, and I would keep you hours on here if I could. If you want to stay, you can. But I know you have lots to do. And I know I'm going to get to hog some of your time in the jungle anyway. So plan on it. Thanks for helping us with some of these obstacles, these fear obstacles. And,
thanks for the opportunity. You ask great questions and get to the heart of things. So that's great.
I know my husband Akeem also studies with you, and he's going to love watching this back. Yeah, just from my heart, everyone, I hope you receive these words. I hope that you get this book and just even start practicing some of these things. They're really life-changing. And it does open up this just different experience of life than maybe you've had up until now, where anything is possible and magic happens around every corner. It's just kind of in your day, out of the blue, synchronicity, kind of a warm, glowing feeling. And that feels better than the other reality. To me, I prefer it. So I invite everyone to it. And besides, you're alive. I'm alive. Jose's alive. You're alive. We're all alive here together. We're doing an aliveness thing. And because we said it's so, it is. And so it's here right now, and it's all so. And we're just acknowledging right now, for the benefit of the planet, that everybody is alive right now. Every single human being on the planet walking around right now is alive. And so we're witnessing them and being alive. So that is helping everyone to remember that they're alive and we're all alive together. And I think that makes a big difference on the planet.
It's good medicine.
Mm-hmm. Good medicine. And, wishing everybody to be alive also helps you, because that way you're asking for what you want, which means that that's going to happen for you if you're wishing it for everybody else. It's a good place to start. Okay, we love you guys. That was a lot. We just threw on you, but hopefully you receive it, everyone. I know my audience is sophisticated spiritually, so we love you. And Jose, thanks so much for coming on. I'll put your links in the show notes below, and I'm going to give everybody kisses. If you want to join me with Reiki kisses, you can or you can. It's up to you. But here they come, everybody. Thank you for staying to the very end. We love you, love you, love you so much. And we'll see you next week on Soul Nectar. Bye for now, everyone. If you found even one gold nugget in this episode of Soul Nectar Show, will you do us a favor? Will you subscribe, like, and share this episode? Maybe even write a comment and let us know what you thought about it. We really, really want to engage with you at a much deeper level. Let's be part of community together. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now. To dive in deeper to nourishing conversation, visit soulnectar.show.
Soul Nectar Show. Awaken the Soul Nectar Show. Take a sip from the drip of nectar, from the source of who you are.